Paul, start if you go mention a little bit like how do you think about this whole ESG movement? You had said that you think it's a big issue. First of all, if you could just set the context for our audience a bit, just kind of how do you think about it? What do you mean by it? How does Northern Trust think about it? Why do you think it's an issue? And what are the dynamics?
Yeah, so ESG, environmental, social governance
Yes.
criteria. If you go back even as recently as 5 years ago, I would have said it was an afterthought, might be too much, but it was a screening process. It was a filter that was put on.
Yes.
Today, it is core to what investors are looking for, what investment managers are doing, regulators, our own administration is placing a high priority on it. In Europe, we just had the launch of the sustainability regulation, which is fascinating to me. I'm looking at one of the requirements of that alone, and one of the firms that produced their analysis of scope 1, scope 2, scope 3. And scope 3 is really indirect use of their products. They think make up 93% of their reporting requirements for their ESG regulatory reporting. So 93% of their reporting requirements are based on things that their consumers are doing with their product. So the availability and accessibility of that data is, I'm only starting to try and wrap my head around it. But it's going to be core because I think there's a demographic shift. A lot of the millennials and so on and Gen Z are looking at their impact on the world. So environmental, social governance, and then our own environment. We look at what's happening over the last year from obviously COVID, but then the social movements around Black Lives Matter, Me Too. They are creating more awareness, and investors, firms are all trying to figure out what is it that we should be doing and how can we influence outcomes. And we've had organizations that, non-governmental or quasi-governmental organizations looking at how we're going to make a difference. Climate change.
Right.
I'm seeing more now on climate change, where historically I would have seen that as part of the E, as in environmental. We're seeing it now starting to be called out as a fourth leg of I suppose it's no longer a stool if it has four legs, it's a chair, becoming a focus in and of itself. And I am really fascinated as to where this goes, because it's not a fad. I don't believe that for a moment.
Yeah.
But it will be interesting to see, both from a regulatory requirements, the allocators of capital, their demands that are placed in this space will drive a lot of what happens. And I think there are a number of unknowns that need to be resolved before we can make any real headway in this space. I mean, ultimately, who's the arbiter of what is good ESG practices? The UN has its principles for responsible investment. SASB actually just merged with another entity into value. I'm blanking on the name of the new organization, but who ultimately decides what is good ESG, and then what are the data and the availability of that data to support ESG practices and define what is successful ESG. And then the last one for me that I've not heard a lot of talk about, and frankly I may just be making this up, it may never be an issue, but is the ESG constant over time, and even constant over short time, like on an annual basis? Does G, and as in the governance, in particular around corporate governance, does that get a higher weighting at quarter end as companies start to produce their results? Does the S, as in the social implications, does that get a higher weighting? Over the last year, we saw what happened to George Floyd and all of what came out of that. Does S become more heavily weighted during that period, or should it be constant to give people the right frame of reference on an ongoing basis? Very early on, but it is going to play and continue. Sorry, it already is, but it's going to play an increasing role in how we look at the world.